What is up, everyone? Phil here, and welcome to KO Gaming. You know, some of the most fun experiences that I've had doing YouTube for the past 8 years is covering new hardware releases. Whether it was movement peripherals such as the Nintendo Wii, the PS Move, the Microsoft Kinect, or console launches like the Wii U, Xbox One, and PlayStation 4. This past week, the PlayStation VR was released. This peripheral promised to bring virtual reality gaming into the mainstream. Anyone who owns a PlayStation 4 and has a little bit of space in their room can have a virtual reality experience like never before. Now, I had stayed away from things like Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive simply because I didn't want to have to buy a super high-end PC in order to experience VR capabilities. Being able to experience it with the existing hardware I already had for a $400 price tag here in the United States seemed a hell of a lot more reasonable. So, this past week, I did a live unboxing as it arrived at my home on its release day of Thursday, as well as a live setup video where I kind of walked through the steps of what it was like to get this thing working in my office. And then over the next 4 days, I played a ton of PlayStation VR games, which quite honestly, in a lot of cases, I have a hard time justifying that title. They are more like little kind of tech demos or experiences rather than full-fledged games, at least from what I experienced. In this video, what I'd like to do is let you know a little bit about my initial impressions of the hardware, the setup, and the functionality that I found for the PSVR through experimentation, and also talk a little bit about the games, as well as a mini montage of some of the best moments of the past 4 days of gameplay. So without further ado, please enjoy my PlayStation VR initial impressions and a little bit of fun montage as well. So first off, I opted for the $400 version of the PSVR rather than the more expensive version, simply because I already owned the PlayStation camera, which I purchased at the launch of the PlayStation 4 back in late 2013, and the more expensive version came with another PS camera that I obviously wouldn't have needed. Now, it is important to note that a lot of games for PSVR are better with the PlayStation Move controllers, and I no longer have them. I actually bought those years ago when they were brand new, and I did extensive coverage of them. Sadly, after only a couple weeks, there really weren't any games that supported them anymore, and they ended up collecting dust, and eventually, thinking they'd never be used again, I threw them out. So right off the bat in this video, I have to give a super special thanks to viewer Michael, who actually got me a pair of PS Move controllers and sent them to me, rather than having me go out there and waste another $100 on these things that I was already burned on. And let me tell you, I really do think that using the PS Move controllers adds to the experience of a lot of these games. So if you have the funds to do so, I strongly recommend that you pick up a pair of them. Now, it is possible to play PSVR games with the controller as well. However, a lot of the games seem to just work a lot better having two different things to move around, one for each hand, rather than trying to maneuver only a singular controller, so I do have to recommend it. So, getting the $400 version of the PlayStation VR, I did a live unboxing, and let me tell you, it was kind of interesting, although at first it could seem like a very daunting task because the PlayStation VR has a ton of cables. It's got cables going from this little PSVR box that does all the 3D kind of generation of graphics to your PS4. It's got wires going to the headset. It's got wires going between. There's USB cables. There's HDMI cables. There's a proprietary connection cable of which I've never even seen the kind before. And it is a little bit confusing at first. Luckily, it does come with step-by-step instructions that, yes, quite honestly, even a dummy could figure out. And I got it hooked up within about a half an hour's time, which wasn't too bad. Then, actually, initially doing some calibrations and testing, I ran into my first group of roadblocks. First off, just getting this unit on your head can be quite a daunting task if you have a larger sized head like I have. In the instructions, it almost seems like they're under the impression that if you push this certain button that the entire band of the headset will become incredibly loose and just fit around your head. This is not the case. It's actually almost elastic, like it's pulling itself closed constantly, so you actually have to use some physical force to pull out the band, get this thing around your head, and then there's a little adjustment knob on the back that you use to actually do fine-tuning tightening. Now, also the visor itself, the two lenses, are connected via this kind of, I don't even know what to call it, scope, I believe it's called in the instructions. And there's a button under the PSVR that you press to kind of adjust whether it's close up to your face or further out. And honestly, reading the initial instructions, it wasn't very clear. It actually took me a few minutes to kind of figure out, oh, this is how I'm supposed to tighten it and kind of get this close to my face. Also, there are these rubber tabs that are over your nose, and these rubber tabs are kind of loose, so it's uncertain when you put the PSVR up against your face if you're supposed to be having these rubber tabs flattened and folded, or if you're supposed to unfold them and have them kind of spread out across your cheekbones. In my case, after doing it several times, I realized just having it folded and flattened seems to work a lot better. So after a few minutes of adjustment, and quite honestly, after trying it out a few different times, I think I perfected the way to get it on, and now it's pretty easy to get it on and off, although initially it could be a little bit of confusion. Now, one initial problem that I ran into that it seemed no one else on the internet was having was that the lenses of the PSVR were fogging up repeatedly as I attempted to calibrate it and play my first set of game demos. Now, I couldn't explain why it was happening. The lenses were blatantly fogging up and I couldn't see anything through the VR because of it. Now, people on my live stream were actually saying, well, we can't hear anyone else who's having this problem. It's only you, so you're making it up. It's just silly, some of the stuff that people say in my stream chat. But anyway, it was actually discovered after a little bit of research and a little bit of experience that the reason that the lens fog up is a temperature differential between the human body and the actual PSVR unit itself. Meaning, if you just turn on your PlayStation 4 and the PSVR and you try to put it on, obviously the equipment's colder than the human body, which creates fog in the lenses, much like if you were to go into your automobile and the inside was warm but on the outside it was cold, you're going to get fog on your windows. So it just makes scientific sense. The way to get around this issue is to actually turn on the PlayStation VR for about 20 to 30 minutes and let it warm up per se, so that the temperature inside the unit is higher and therefore it won't create this temperature differential and fogging of the lenses. It is a little annoying if you forget to turn on the unit right away or a few minutes before you're about to play a game and you try to jump into a game right away, because you will get an initial fogging period of about 10 minutes until it finally gets warm enough and it doesn't happen anymore. So fair warning to anyone who is trying this thing out for the first time, make sure that it was warmed up or else you're going to get condensation all over the lenses and it's not going to be a fun time. So one of the major concerns that I had about virtual reality was, number one, having some kind of equipment on my head for an extended period of time, and number two, eye strain. Well, I have a few pieces of feedback in regards to both. First of all, the unit itself is not very heavy. The PSVR is actually quite light, and yes, it does feel like there's a little bit of a weight and a tug on your head when you put it on, but it's not so much that it feels like it's really bogging you down, and even after extended play sessions, my neck didn't really feel any kind of physical strain or anything like that. But the one major complaint that I do have about the unit at this point is that it just seems like it's not designed well when it comes to ventilation. I mean, the whole point of VR is to isolate your eyes in this darkened area so that it seems like you're surrounded by 3D graphics, and I understand why they need to have rubberized pieces go around your eyeballs and your face. But what ends up happening is after about 15 to 20 minutes of wearing the PlayStation VR, my face starts to sweat. And having sweat build up under my eyes and on my forehead isn't exactly the most comfortable experience for a virtual reality gameplay through, and it just starts to get really annoying. It's to the point where I actually have to take breaks about every 15 to 20 minutes that I play the PlayStation VR, but it's not for the reason that initially I thought it would be. I've actually had zero eye strain since playing the PlayStation VR for 4 straight days since its launch. In fact, it completely threw me for a loop, because I had heard reports that people had played certain games and they had felt motion sick, or they had these kinds of, nauseousness, and I didn't get any of that whatsoever, which is great. But then again, I'm not a kind of person that gets nauseous all the time over things, so in that regard, it's not surprising. But the fact that I still have to take frequent breaks when playing the PSVR because of the amount of discomfort because of the sweat is kind of a really bad thing. I mean, they couldn't test this thing enough with enough people to see if it was going to make people sweat. And by the way, I'm not the only person reporting this. Several people who also have the PSVR kind of contacted me after my initial coverage to tell me that they were doing the exact same thing and experiencing the exact same discomfort, and that's unfortunate. Now, some recommendations, someone said, gee, if you have a fan on in your room and you have a lot of ventilation, it could definitely help with that. In my particular case, I'm in an enclosed office. My window is wide open, and my office is actually cold. So I don't think it's the temperature at all. I just think it's the fact that you physically have this unit rubbing against your face constantly. It creates a buildup of air pressure and condensation within the lenses, and it also causes sweat of the human skin. I don't think there's a way around it right now. I'd be very interested to see if they design any improvements in the future to stop this, but for now, the PSVR is something that needs to have frequent breaks in order to be a comfortable gameplay experience. So now let's talk spatial requirements for this virtual reality device. That was actually a major concern of mine because I have a relatively small home office out of which I do all of my gameplay streams and videos, and I wasn't sure that the PlayStation VR was going to be compatible for me. Well, I'm happy to report that about 80% of the games that are currently available for this unit are actually pretty much playable just from an easy sitting position. Right now, on my little love seat in my office, I've got about 2 feet in front of me of free space and about 2 feet on each side as well, and I was able to easily play games such as Drive Club VR, Until Dawn Rush of Blood, Riggs, Eve Valkyrie, and a ton of others. In fact, out of all the games that I played, there were very few that actually gave me any kind of issue with the controls. Headmaster, which is a game that simulates you actually heading a football or soccer ball, actually had a little bit of problems because it wasn't really tracking my head movements as well as I would like it to have been, and I couldn't really control where the ball was going, so for that game I didn't particularly like it too much. For Batman Arkham VR, this was the first game where I experienced some issues because I could not get this to trigger and actually calibrate while I was sitting down. It basically forced me to stand up in order to play the game, and unfortunately, because I don't have a ton of space, things that were far to my right were incredibly hard to touch during my playthrough of this game, forcing me to recalibrate several different times, trying to move a little bit more and a little bit more to the left so that I could actually touch things on the right side of the experience. But overall, by far, the game that just seemed to defy the parameters that Sony gave for the PlayStation VR was Job Simulator. Now, this is a shame because Job Simulator actually was one of the more interesting games that I experienced for the PSVR, but it's just baloney. What Sony said are the actual space requirements for this unit are not what Job Simulator needs. It needs a hell of a lot more, to the point where I couldn't even play it standing up in front of my love seat. I had to completely readjust my office to make room in the center, reposition the television and the camera, and basically stand up in the middle of my open office for about 2 to 3 hours to play through this game, because otherwise it would not recognize things on my far left, on my far right. It wouldn't recognize when I was crouching. It was giving me a lot of issues. So it seems to me that the actual spatial requirements for the PSVR are not a solid or static thing. It's going to be something that's going to change all the time. It's going to be something that's going to constantly be fluctuating dependent on the style of game that you play. Some are going to be more for just kind of couch potato relaxing and playing like a standard video game, while others are going to force you to stand up and be more active and have more space around you. It's a shame that these games right now don't actually tell you the requirements for each and every one. You're going to end up buying them not knowing, can I work with this with the space that I have or can't I? Now, obviously, this is the launch of this peripheral, and in the future, sure, I'm sure game developers are going to do a better job of not needing as much space, or if they do need a lot of space, maybe they'll start putting it on the boxes or on the back of, the warnings where they have all those warning labels in the back of a box. Maybe they'll say, you need this much space, but right now we have no guideline. We're all kind of flying by the seat of our pants, and that's a shame because it is very different experiences depending on what game you're playing. For a launch library, the PlayStation VR has a surprisingly large number of titles available, although, as I previously stated in this video, they're not all necessarily full games. A lot of these could be considered maybe 1 to 2 hour long tech demos and or maybe kind of initial experiences so that you can get the gist of what VR's capabilities actually are, but they're not full-fledged games. In fact, of all of the launch titles available for the PlayStation VR, only Battlezone and Eve Valkyrie have a full price tag of $60. And I honestly have a really hard time justifying putting down $60 for anything that's VR right now, simply because I know that after about 20 minutes of playing, I get uncomfortable and I need to take a break and take this thing off of my head. So if I'm going to buy a game that's, say, 8 to 10 hours long, how long is it going to take me to play through that game? I'm going to have to take so many breaks, it might not even be a fun experience, so I'm really wary about buying a full-price game right now. But some of the notable experiences in games that are out there: Until Dawn Rush of Blood, which is an on-rails shooter featuring a lot of the horror and scares from last year's survival horror game Until Dawn. It is kind of a what-if scenario. It's not canon with the game itself. It's more of just a rail shooting fun with, by the way, a lot of really neat 3D jump scares. There's parts where the enemies are actually to your left, right, or above you, and you have to actually move your head around to even see them and be able to shoot them. That's really neat, and it was actually a lot of fun, even though, quite honestly, it was just a cheesy on-rails shooter at its core. Another game was Job Simulator, which I've already mentioned, where you simulate 4 different jobs using VR to kind of move around and do these cartoonish versions of being a chef or a store clerk, and it's kind of fun and neat. There's a lot of quirky humor and stuff in that game that I very much enjoyed, and I think that that's one that probably a lot of people will get a lot of enjoyment out of, because there's 4 different things, and there's actually replayability with some hidden achievements and stuff in there, so it's pretty cool. Some games that I really didn't particularly like: Rigs. This game just looks like kind of a mech combat game. The controls are a little wonky. They expect you to double jump to score and drop through hoops, but the double jumping itself isn't very precise. Almost feels like you're kind of floating or gliding around when you jump, and you can't really get the height that you need in order to easily score. So after playing the demo of that one, I wasn't very much impressed. Drive Club VR, it's cool that there's a driving game right off the bat that you can play in virtual reality. However, the controls were really dumbed down. After playing Forza Horizon 3 in the past couple of weeks and then jumping into this game, it really feels like it's not even a simulation, but more just kind of a, oh, it's going to push you along and help you drive because we realize this is VR and it's kind of disorienting. In addition, there wasn't even any music in the demo. Now, I don't know if there's actually going to be any in the full game, which is $40, by the way, right now, but I just wasn't blown away by what I saw in the demo, and I had no kind of intent to go ahead and buy this game. One thing that I was a little bit disappointed about was that there is a Resident Evil 7 demo slash kind of tech demo VR kind of experience that comes with a demo disc that comes with your PlayStation VR, but it's just you sitting in a chair basically getting chopped apart by this ghoul. There's no gameplay at all. You just sit there and watch, and that's kind of disappointing in my opinion. There's also this cool unique game called Here They Lie. It seems like it's survival horror, but quite honestly I can't really put my finger on what the hell it is yet because I haven't played it. I bought it after playing the demo because I liked it so much, but I haven't actually gotten a chance to play it yet, so I'll probably have further feedback on that in the future. Of course, you got your oddball stuff like Hatsune Miku VR Future Live Demo, where you literally just bounce your head and pound your fist and watch this anime girl dance around on a virtual stage. I'm sure some people will be absolutely nuts for something like that. I'm not in particular one of those people. But one of the things that I actually liked the most out of everything that I've tried was the game called PlayStation VR Worlds. This game is a $40 purchase, and it is basically an amalgamation of different experiences in virtual reality. So far, I've played one where you're under the sea, and there's a shark attacking you while you're in a cage, and you're kind of looking at different fish and stuff around you on this kind of adventure. However, much like the other games that I've mentioned where you don't do anything, there's no interaction. You just stand there and watch everything happen. You don't actually even need a controller to play the thing. But then there's something called the London Heist, where you're simulated being a thief in London. You're basically breaking into a house, you're looking through a desk trying to steal a diamond, then there's a shootout, and then there's another shootout on a highway, and then there's kind of an ending mystery where you have to make a choice, and you have 3 different possible endings depending on the choice that you make. This game seems like it may be the best one for newcomers to virtual reality, because it's giving you a wide variety of experiences. Some you just sit there, and you don't have to do anything, and you can just enjoy the ride, while the other, there's interactivity, and it's like a game with challenge levels and stuff. So I really like this game, and I'm looking forward very much to diving back into it at a future date. Now, the one game that everyone was abuzz about for the PlayStation VR was Batman Arkham VR, because let's face it, it's made by Rocksteady, the same studio that brought us the past 3 Batman Arkham games that were absolutely amazing over this last gaming generation. It has the voice talents of Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy reprising their roles as the Joker and Batman respectively. It's pretty damned awesome when you think I could play the Arkham games in VR. But that's not really what the game is at all. It's only a $20 price tag, and quite honestly, the game can easily be beaten within an hour, although if you take your time looking around a little bit more, you'll probably get about 90 minutes out of it. And there is some replayability, because at the end you unlock some riddles, right? Just from the Batman Arkham series, those riddles are iconic and synonymous with the series, and yes, they do exist after your first run through the game. But the game has really nothing to do with Batman Arkham's legacy at all. There's zero combat whatsoever in this experience. You basically play the role of Bruce Wayne / Batman. First, you're kind of dicking around in Bruce Wayne's mansion, and then you actually go underground into the Batcave. You become the Batman. You get to be the Batman for the very first time. You're dicking around in the Batcave, doing a little bit of investigation into the disappearance of Nightwing and Robin. You eventually try to investigate and see what happened to the two. There's a rescue mission. There's a little bit of interaction with the Penguin, and then at the end there's kind of a big resolution that's like, whoa, what the fuck moment. But it is fun as long as you're not going into it with high expectations of it being a Batman Arkham game, because it very much is not. The visuals are the same, the cast is the same, but none of the gameplay that you've expected in the Arkham series is in this VR experience. And I think a lot of people, after hearing about this, kind of got turned off and said, oh, it's all overhyped or overrated. I don't necessarily think so. I think that Rocksteady was tasked with basically trying to adapt a game series into a VR experience, and I think they did a good job. Is this necessarily worth $20? I don't know. Unless you're going to go back and really search out all the riddles, there's really no reason to ever play this thing again, and therefore $20 for only an hour of gameplay could be a pretty tall order in this day and age. But overall, I did enjoy Batman Arkham VR. My overall impressions of the PlayStation VR after my first gameplay experiences are as follows. I actually think that the device is revolutionary. I think that VR does have a place in gameplay's future. But is it necessarily now? I honestly, after experiencing the PlayStation VR, have to say probably not yet. For the most part, the gameplay experiences that I have were over-glorified tech demos and or kind of limited time experiences, mostly because I felt so much discomfort wearing the headset for longer than 20 minutes that I had to take it off and take a break. I realistically do not see any AAA studio designing a game exclusively for the PlayStation VR or any VR headset if you have to take frequent breaks in order to play it. Imagine buying a $60 retail game that says it's 20 hours long, but you can only play it in 20 to 25 minute increments before you have to take an extended break to get the sweat off your face and kind of get a breath of fresh air, and before you jump back in. It could take you so long to beat the game, and honestly, it could actually bog down your experience. What if you're in the middle of an important part of the game or a critical firefight or something going on, and now all of a sudden you're feeling discomfort and you need to take a break? It's not necessarily going to work. If anything, I think what's going to end up happening is that game developers are going to start making unique style games for virtual reality that are not similar to those of the ones that we've seen in the past, that are going to allow themselves to be played in small episodes. Imagine if you had kind of a mystery or a thriller game where the episodes were only 20 minutes long a piece, and the game had like maybe 20 or 30 of them. So that way you could sit down, play an episode, take a break, play an episode, take a break, and it works. It's easily digestible, and it doesn't bother you too much that you have to keep taking the damn thing off. Unless they completely redesign the hardware to make no discomfort whatsoever, which I'm not even sure is scientifically or physically possible, I don't see VR being feasible for the mainstream hardcore gaming audience. If anything, this is kind of a gimmick, much like motion controls, much like 3D television, and much like all those other gimmicks that we've seen in the past several years that kind of had their height of popularity and then fizzled out into oblivion after people got their taste and realized it wasn't such a special thing. I think VR is kind of going to be the same thing. Everyone's going to get a taste, say, wow, this is amazing, and then after doing it for a little bit, realizing there's not much substance there, they're going to kind of give up on it and go back to the standard. And it's unfortunate, because I actually think there's potential for growth here if the game developers can do something that works and makes a game that the formula works with having this big peripheral on your freaking head. But right now, out of all the games that I played during this launch window, I didn't really see it. What I saw were games that were just, overpriced 1 to 2 hour experiences just for the sake of saying, oh, here's a VR game, rather than saying, here's a game worth playing. And even though I enjoyed games like Until Dawn, Rush of Blood with these crazy jump scares and survival horror and stuff like that, how many times can you say, okay, it was a 3D jump scare before the gimmick wears off and you realize you're just kind of playing a pretty boring rail shooter that doesn't have anything complex to it whatsoever? And that's going to be the problem in my opinion. The longevity of the unit. The initial shock is great, but after a few months to a few years, is anyone going to care about the PSVR or any of these other VR units? I really don't know. I think it's really going to depend on Sony and the game developers to make unique gameplay experiences that we really feel we need this peripheral for. Right now, I'm not feeling it. I'm certainly not writing it off. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised with my initial impressions of the unit, but it remains to be seen what happens in the future. Well, that's it for my initial thoughts on the PlayStation VR. I sure hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, everyone, please consider giving it a like right here on YouTube, as well as spreading the word that I'll be covering the PlayStation VR in the future, and that this video exists so that people will start coming to KO Gaming to check out future coverage as well. Please check out the video description for a Loot Crate discount code, as well as my Patreon links, and of course a link to all of my raw gameplay of the PlayStation VR over on my partner channel, DSP Gaming. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time right here on KO Gaming.